Good morning, everyone. Welcome to How and Where to Get Ideas for Publication. This is a webinar conducted by Dr. Kizito. A few minutes ago, I called Kizito, asked him how to pronounce your family name, and I forgot.
Ehigiamusoe.
Sorry, Kizito. We have been working together for, I think it's the second year, right?
Yeah.
I never called you with your family name. So anyway, we know you as Dr. Kizito. And yeah, so Dr. Kizito is a lecturer in Taylor's Business School, Faculty of Business and Law, Taylor's University, and he worked as a teaching fellow in the School of Social Sciences, USM, University Science Malaysia. Dr. Kizito was also a researcher in the Department of Research and Training, National Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, National Assembly, Nigeria. He obtained his PhD from University Science Malaysia under the USM Fellowship Award. He also attended the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and the School of Mathematical Sciences in USM for certificate courses in applied econometrics. His main research areas include financial economics, energy economics, macroeconomics, applied econometrics. In these research areas, Dr. Kizito has presented several papers in academic conferences in Europe, Africa, and Asia. He has published several articles in reputable peer-reviewed journals. It's a long list. I just read some of them. Applied Energy, Journal of Sustainable Tourism, Environmental Science and Pollution Research, Journal of Policy Modeling, Energy Sources, Part B Economics, Planning and Policy, Empirical Economics, and many more. Dr. Kizito serves as a reviewer for several Scopus and SSCI index journals, and the list that I see is a long list, all Scopus and top tier journals in SSCI. And Dr. Kizito conducts actually several academic workshops, seminars for students and young researchers. Based on my experience, based on what we have seen the past 2 years, he has contributed a lot by conducting these type of workshops. And now I think this is your first webinar, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So Dr. Kizito, stage is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Said, for that introduction. And also thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I just hope I'll be able to add values to those who are listening over there. Because when you look at the audience and you see some of the names, so you wonder, what are you going to say that these people have not known already? Especially when you have people like Dr. Said here, Dr. Navas, and some other people. But it's fine. I will just do my best to see what I'm going to share today. So actually, what I'm going to share today is based on a question that people have been asking me for some time now. Because when I work when people see me working and people stop me and they say, "Oh, Dr. Kizi, I've seen your publication in so many journals. I see your publication in mainly Q1 and Q2 journals." And one thing about your publications is that either you are the single author or you are the main author of the paper. So it means that the idea of this paper actually came from you. That they know that other people also publish a lot of papers, but you see, sometimes their names are in a crowd of authors, maybe 5, 6 authors, and maybe they are the 5th author, the 6th author. But in your papers, you're either the only author or you are the first author, and sometimes you just have 2 authors. So how do you get these ideas that you publish? Are you not exhausted of ideas? And I've attempted to answer these questions, but I don't know if I've been successful in trying to convince them how I answer the question. So when Dr. Said called me and said, "Oh, okay, we're organizing a webinar, and we want you to share ideas about publication with the participant. I said, okay. And he said, oh, we know you have been doing a lot of workshop for a Center for Higher Degree by Research. Oh, you have so many, so you already have so many prepared topics. You can present one of those topics. And one thing that came to my mind was that, oh, perhaps there could be some people who have attended my workshop before, especially in February, March, and April this year, who will also be in the webinar. So for them, the webinar will be very boring. And I thought to myself, okay, what can I do? And I just remember this question. Yeah, Dr. Kizi, where do you get ideas for publication? I said, okay, maybe this may be a good opportunity to actually share these ideas so that when people see me on the road, they don't ask me again, Dr. Kizi, where do you get ideas for publication? So today is going to be a sharing session, actually. I'm not going to present a technical issue on, or present technical issues on how to get ideas and where to get ideas for publication. I am going to present a personal encounter, okay? I'm going to present a practical experience, how I've been able to do it in the past few years to publish the few papers I have published. There are a lot of people here that have published far more than I have done. So I'm just going to present my own experience, and I just hope we can actually get from it. So now, Dr. Said, you permit me to share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to share it. Yeah, we see your screen.
Okay. So that is why today I am going to talk about how and where to get ideas for publication. And we're going to look at this outline. We're going to look at communication skills, thesis, variables, literature review, theory, methodology, data, conclusion, and possibly questions. Questions not from people like Dr. Said or Dr. Navas, maybe questions from students, the one I can answer. Yeah, so now talking about communication skill, we all know that these 4 communication skills are very important. Talking about reading, talking about writing, talking about speaking and listening. Okay, so if you want to have ideas for publication, the first thing you need to do is you must be a good reader. Okay, you must be a good reader in the sense that you should be somebody that reads all the time. Yeah, I remember some time ago, I gave myself a target and I said, oh, every day I should read 1 article. I'm not talking about reading the abstract of an article. I'm talking about reading the article from the beginning to the end. And when I read the article, I should be able to summarize the article. What is this article saying? What is the gap in this article? What are the strengths of this article? What is the methodology used in this article? At least in 2 pages. And I did that for a very long time. You know, you can read articles, you can read books, you can read news articles, theses, conference papers and proceedings, as well as annual report. Reading is very important for anyone who wants to actually publish articles. And the next one is writing. When you read and you don't make notes, you are more likely to forget, because you read 1 paper today and you didn't make any note. The next time you read another paper, then you forget about what you have read. At that point in time that you read the paper, you may think that, oh, the paper you read is very fresh in your memory, but at the time you attend other meetings and you put other information there in your brain, you are more likely to forget. So that's why writing is very important if you want to actually know how to publish papers. So the third one is speaking. You know, speaking is important in publication because it enables you to get ideas from friends. And when you go to conferences, when you attend webinar, you attend workshop, you know, you talk to the speaker, you talk to the participant, you interact with your friends, and you interact with your ideas. It gives you a very good idea, especially when you are trying to understand where is the developing literature in your area. And in that case, it will be easy for you to actually ensure that you get good interaction with your people and get ideas on where the developing literature in your area is actually heading to. So the last one here is listening. You know, you don't just read, you don't just write, you don't just speak, you should also listen to others. And that is where conference is important. You know, as you're interacting with your friends, you don't just be the one that will speak throughout. So as you're interacting with your friends, also listen to what your friends are saying, also listen to what the discussions on research activities. In that way, you'll be able to know what is happening, what others are doing, and how you can create a research gap. So now back to the question, where to get ideas for publication. Number one, thesis. So you can actually get idea for publication if you are a PhD student, or you are a master student, or you have graduated. You're already a PhD holder, you have graduated, say 4 or 5 years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago. You can actually get ideas for publication from your thesis. Last time I did a workshop in the Center for Higher Degree, and the title of the workshop was how to get multiple publication from thesis. And in that workshop, I shared with the participants how I published 14 SSCI papers from my thesis. So today I'm not going to do that, but here I'm just going to summarize how you can get publication from thesis. Number one, you look at the objectives of your thesis. Okay, you look at the objective of your thesis. What are the objective of your thesis about? And you can actually pick each of the objective of your thesis and actually make them a complete paper. And sometimes people say, "Oh, Dr. Kizi, don't you think the one objective of my thesis is too narrow?" It is not too narrow. One objective has a main idea, and this main idea can be developed in several ways. Developing this idea means, you have this idea, this one objective from your thesis, then you can use different methodologies to actually address the issue on that particular thesis. And if you do that, you'll be able to get 15, 20 pages that will make up a paper which you can publish in any good journal. And the next part of the thesis you can look at is actually the research gap. When you look at your thesis, you try to look at it, I did this thesis some time ago. And how come when I did this thesis, I didn't think of this? I've met some people, several people, and they tell me, I think I also heard it from Dr. Said early this year before the lockdown. And some people will tell you, I published a paper 10 years ago, but when I go back to read the paper now, I try to ask myself, am I the one that actually wrote this paper? Because when you read the paper, you see a lot of gaps. How come I didn't think like this at that time when I wrote this paper? So when you look at the paper, you see there are a lot of gaps you can actually look at. So when you actually look at your thesis that you have written before, or the part you wrote earlier on, and when you read them again, you can see research gaps, which you can actually develop into a paper. And that takes us to the next one, which is a limitation and suggestion for further research. Because if you pick up any thesis, there is usually a section they call a limitation for the thesis. Okay, so in that part of the thesis, they will look at the limitation. These are the limitations of the thesis. And because of those limitations, they suggest areas for further research. So when you look at a completed thesis and you look at those limitations, you can actually pick up an idea from there that you can publish as a paper. Then for those who have not completed your thesis, okay, you may not have the research, the limitation, but certainly you have your objectives and you have your problem statement. Last time I also did another workshop in the Center for Higher Degree. I think that was March, and the title of the workshop was how to write problem statement, and the introduction session of a research paper. I remember in that session I explained how to actually write the problem statement in a thesis, moving from general to specific. I try to look at the real life problem. From real life problem, then you move to specific problem. From specific problem, you move to a research problem. So by looking at your problem statement, by looking at your objective and your research gap in the thesis that has not been completed, you can actually bring out a paper from it. So I just shared this with you. When I did my PhD some years ago, I have 4 research objectives in my thesis, and each of the objectives I try as much as possible to make them a paper. For example, this was my first objective. This was the first objective in my PhD thesis, and the objective was actually to find out whether the finance growth nexus is valid in West Africa region. The West Africa region is made up of 16 countries. And I look at it, most of the finance growth nexus paper in that region actually look at individual country, and there was no actually any paper that have looked at the 16 countries together. Perhaps they didn't see data to look at it. So I have to subscribe to different areas to get data, and I did, and this was my first objective in my thesis. And as you can see from here, this paper was published in Emerging Market Finance and Trade. It's a SSCI Q1 journal. Then the second objective was to look at whether economic union actually affects the finance growth nexus. Okay, that was the second objective in my thesis, and it was published in Africa Development Review. Africa Development Review is SSCI Index journal, and it's a Q2 journal. So the third objective in my thesis was actually to look at the moderating effect of inflation on finance growth nexus. You know, so this I make a paper and I publish it in Empirical Economics. Empirical Economics is SSCI Index, and it's a Q1 journal. So the fourth objective of my thesis was actually to look at how macroeconomic stability influence financial development. Okay, and this I made to be one paper, and I published it in another SSCI journal, Singapore Economic Review. So this is just a practical way of looking at how I can actually get a publication idea from thesis. So if that is clear, so we move on to number 2. Where can I get ideas for publication? Number 2, variables. You can actually get ideas for publications by looking at the variables in your subject area. Okay, so you look at what is happening. Perhaps maybe your discipline is finance, or your discipline is tourism, or your discipline is environmental economics, or your discipline is consumer behavior or marketing. Then you look at the papers published by other journals, and you ask yourself, what are the variables that people are actually talking about? So when you look at those variables people are actually talking about, so there are so many things you can do with these variables. Number 1, you can include additional variable. Meaning, for example, people are talking about the impact of finance on economic growth, and they say financial development affect economic growth because when a country's financial system is developed, it promotes capital accumulation, it promotes productivity growth, thereby stimulating the financial sector to perform those intermediary functions. And because of that, economic growth will be accelerated. Then, if this is the literature, then you can think of, okay, should I add another variable to this this literature? Maybe I add income inequality. So I want to argue that yes, finance can actually affect growth, but in a society where income distribution is unequal, the result may be different. And I tell you, if you do that, you can publish it in a journal. Or you want to look at it and say, oh, yes, finance can actually affect growth. But what of in a country where institutional quality is very poor? Because institutions are important. They enable people to go into long-term contracts. And when there are no long-term contracts, there will not be a long-term investment. And when there is no long-term investment, there will not be capital accumulation, and total productivity growth will be low. Therefore, finance cannot boost growth in such an economy. So you are now adding a different variable to the finance growth nexus. The next thing you can also do with variables, you can exclude some variables. When you look at papers published by people, you see people talk about the impact of globalization, the foreign direct investment, and trade openness on economic growth. And you look at papers, people do a lot of things when it comes to publications. The issue is just because the ideas differ and people understanding of theories and econometrics also differ too. You see, so when you look at other papers that people have done, you can actually look at the people and say, no, this variable is not supposed to be in this model. And the reason is because if these two variables are in this model, these variables may cause what we call collinearity, or these variables may weaken the relationship between the other two variables. I give you, for example, somebody wrote a paper, and the paper was on globalization and economic growth, and the person included trade openness in the model. And I was wondering and said, oh my God, trade openness is an example of globalization, because when countries trade with one another, it promotes globalization. financial integration is another aspect of globalization. And another aspect of globalization is foreign direct investment. So if you want to see how globalization affects economic growth, and you already have globalization index in your model, you don't need to include any of this, whether foreign direct investment, whether trade openness, or whether financial integration. Okay, so when you see a paper that does that, so you can actually write your paper and look at it and say, no, this thing is strong. I'm going to use the same data this person used. Maybe person used the data for Malaysia from 1980 to 2015. I'm going to use that same data and I'm going to remove this variable and see if I can still get the same result. And I tell you, you can publish that paper in a journal. The next thing you can do, you can also do interaction effects. You know, when you look at all papers are looking at the direct effect of variable A on variable B, you can look at, okay, you can add another variable and use that variable as interaction effect. And in that case, you're actually saying that variable S affects variable Y only if variable Z is present or only if variable Z is absent. So in that case, you are using a moderating or mediating effect. And also, you can also test the process used in measuring the variables. You know, I remember our yesterday in our e-conference, you know, I was telling one of the participants that, oh, if you want to measure a particular variable, for example, you want to measure tourism, you want to know whether tourism has impact on economic growth or on carbon emission or environmental degradation, and you use only one proxy of tourism, for example, you know, reviewers are likely to ask you, why do you use one proxy? Because tourism, you can measure tourism by using international tourism receipts. You can measure tourism by using number of tourism arrival. You can measure tourism by using tourism expenditure. So these are the three main variables in empirical literature that you can use to measure tourism. So if you do a paper and you only use one proxy to measure tourism, so people are going to tell you that, oh, perhaps your result is sensitive to the proxy you use to measure tourism. Why not try other proxies? You know, and also look at the finance growth nexus, for example. There are so many proxies you can use to measure finance. You can use credit to private sector. You can use money supply. You can use liquid liability. You can even construct a principal component index of financial development. Or of course, you can use a stock market development where you can look at liquid liability. You can look at the value of stock traded. You know, you can look at market capitalization. You can look at turnover ratios. So there are so many proxies you can look at. So you can actually test these variables. Is there a different way? When I use this variable, do I get a different result? I think some time ago I did something like that. So I will just show you now shortly. Yeah. So in this paper I did with two professors this year actually, but it was placed in 2019 volume. And this paper was able to look at the impact of financial structure on environmental quality. You know, I have seen a paper before. I think the paper was written by Shabazz, Professor Shabazz, and he tried to look at the impact of financial development on environmental degradation. And when I look at the paper, I said, oh, this author focused mainly on a banking sector. Okay, this author didn't talk about a stock market sector. So assuming we include stock market in our analysis and use all the three variables to capture stock market efficiency, stock market liquidity, and stock market market capitalization, will the result be different? So I did this work using a different set of data, actually 58 data from 58 countries, and the paper was published in Energy Sources. It's ISI index and it's a Q2 journal. So similarly, this paper I also did. A lot of people have worked on the energy consumption and carbon emission, how energy consumption affects carbon emission. You remember in my number 3, I talked about using moderating effect. So when I look at that, okay, a lot of people have done a lot of things on energy consumption and carbon emission, income and carbon emission, talking about the environmental Kuznets curve. I said, assuming I interact energy consumption with income, what happens to carbon emission? You know, so I conceived that idea and I did this paper, and of course with Prof. Lien from USM and Prof. Lucia Smith from Monash University in Australia, and the paper was published in Applied Energy, which is SSCI index, and it's a Q1 journal. Then one more. So this paper was one of the earliest paper I published when I was trying to test process for measuring financial development. Remember, one of the issues I talked about there was looking at the process. You can also test the process. the process for measuring the variable you are interested in. So in this paper, published in a Botanical Journal of Social Science and Humanities, I try to look at whether the process of measuring financial development actually matters. Is it important? Do they produce the same result or they produce a different result? And this paper was published in a Botanical Journal, and this journal is indexed in ESCI and also Scopus. So the next question is, where do I get publication idea? Number 3, literature review. Don't forget, we've answered this question using the first one. We say thesis, you can get from thesis, looking at the problem statement, looking at the objective, looking at the research gap, as well as the limitation and suggestion for further studies. And number 2, we talk about variables. And we say you can look at the variables which have been published in papers and see how you can include variables, see how you can exclude variables, see how you can interact variables, and how you can actually test the different procedures for different variables. So number 3, we are going to look at literature review. Another area you can get idea for publication is looking at literature review. So I remember during my PhD, during my PhD, when I was doing my PhD, you know, when I look at my thesis, I discovered that, oh, my thesis became unusually too bulky because every day I have to read one article, summarize the article. So I wrote a lot of things, and the article became so bulky, and my supervisor was saying, oh, okay, what do you think you can do? Your thesis is too bulky, and it will be, and the external examiner will not feel comfortable looking at the thesis. I said, okay, Prof, don't worry, I'm going to think of what to do. So the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, why should I just delete some literature from my thesis and just throw them away? I haven't spent so much energy and so much time and eating a lot of nasi kanda, nasi koren to do this thing. So it's a waste. So why should I do that? So a thought come to my mind. I said, okay, instead of throwing this literature review away, why not organize this literature review and publish it as a literature review paper? You know, so actually when you review literature and you have so many literature review, you can actually look at the issues and say, okay, you make it into a paper. Talking about literature review, there are so many, talking about review generally, I think there are 3 types of, okay, Dr. Said is here, so he will correct me if I'm wrong. So there are 3 basic types of a review. You can do a literature review, which we are used to. You can do systematic review. Of course, Prof. Said is an expert in that area. And also you can do a meta-analysis. I think there's a workshop on meta-analysis coming up later today. So I'm only going to talk about a literature review because Dr. Said have organized a lot of training for systematic review, and there is another training today for meta-analysis. So I will only talk about literature review. How can your literature review be published? Because I remember some time ago, I sent a paper to a journal, and one of the comments I got from the journal was, oh, your literature review is poorly written. I said, oh my God. I wrote 5 pages of literature review, and I divided those literature review into developed countries, developing countries, low-income countries. I divided into different variables. Energy is here, financial development is here, FDI is here. I thought I have done a nice job organizing my literature for that paper. But one of the reviewers said, my literature review was poorly organized. And when I checked the second reviewer report, the second reviewer said, your literature is just listing. I said, oh my God, which one is listing? Oh, that you just listed, you just say author A investigated the impact of A on B and found out that A affected B. Author B, 2010, investigated the impact of B on A and found that A affected B. That you just listed like that, your literature review was not critical. And when I look at those comments, so I have to go in depth and study how to do critical literature review. And that informed the workshop I did in March in Center for Higher Degree, which I titled How to Do a Critical Literature Review. You know, I share my idea with all the participants that attended the conference. And one of those slides from those literature review was actually talking about how to do a description, how to do sentences, and how to do a critique. So I wouldn't want to bore you with a type of review. This we'll get more about a meta-analysis later, and Dr. Said is here, so he has taught a lot of people how to do a systematic review. And Dr. Nava is also here. She's also an expert on a systematic review. They've done a lot of papers on that. So I'll just go on to look at the normal literature review we do. Okay, so in literature review, when you do only description of the literature, it is difficult for you to get your paper published. Okay, so if you want to get your paper published, you must ensure that your literature review involves description, involves sentences, and critique. When we say description, it means that you pick up one paper and you are doing between or within analysis. You look at the objective of the paper, you look at the research question the paper is trying to address, you look at the summary of the key issues, the method, the theories, the conclusion, and the limitation. So in that case, you are describing the paper. Then after that, you need to do sentences. In these sentences, you have to extract the selected ideas, the themes. You have to compare the ideas in terms of looking at the clarification, looking at the inconsistency, looking at the shared conclusion. What are the contrasting views, and what are the views like that? You know, because like yesterday, I was during our presentation, our year conference, and I was asking thinking about when one of the presenters was saying, talking about the tourism-led growth hypothesis, that some people find it is positive, some people find it is negative, some people find it is not significant. And the presenter stopped there. If you do that in a paper, the reviewer is going to ask you why. Why is it that some find positive effects, some find negative effects, and some find no effect? So you should be able to synthesize, you should be able to look at the reason behind. Is it that they use different data? Is it that they use different method? Is it that they use different sample size? Is it that they use different methodology? Is it that they use different prosy? Is it that they add more variables? Is it because of the variables they control for in the model? These things are very important when you are doing literature review. So the last part of it is the critique. In this critique, you must develop a critical view of the work you are reviewing based on the evidence available to you. You must evaluate the weakness of the research. Examine the claims against alternative evidence, look at the rhetoric logic, look at the theories, look at the established belief, and look at the knowledge, the positive mind. And when you are doing this type of critique, you must have a positive-minded approach. You are not going to criticize and say, oh, Dr. Kizi's paper is very bad. Dr. Kizi, the paper was not written well. Fine, write your own. And say, oh, this paper was not written well, so I have to write this because this idea were not presented well. So when you are doing a literature review, you should have a positive-minded approach to provide new ideas and alternatives. So don't just criticize and say, oh, this paper used OLS. How can you use OLS? Don't you know that OLS cannot address endogeneity? OLS cannot address cross-sectional dependence? OLS cannot address autocorrelation? And in your paper, you are still using OLS. So it doesn't make sense. So if you criticize that, oh, you cannot use ordinary least square as a method to address an issue, then you should use a superior method that can address those issues that ordinary least square cannot address. So in that case, and one thing I must say is that when you are doing a literature review, it is important to look at the method. I think I mentioned it somewhere here. The method they use, okay, it's here. You must analyze the methods because the reason for the different results may be because of a different methodology. So now I will just share with you some papers I've done on literature review. So I did this paper on literature review because the idea to write this paper came in when Britain was trying to exit EU. That was in 2016. Okay, I look at, oh, Britain wants to exit EU. Does that mean the economic union is no longer relevant? Is it that it doesn't affect macroeconomic variables? Not just about UK. It's also about Italy, France, and so many countries. There were pressure on them to leave the EU. So I said, okay, let me do a critical analysis of economic union and financial integration on how they affect economic prosperity. And this paper was published in Economics, which is SSCI Index Journal, and it's a Q2 journal. So I also did a second paper. So this one is coming up in International Journal of Finance and Economy. It's also SSCI journal, and I try to look at what are those variables that affect finance growth next door. It's a critical survey paper. Okay, trying to look at the survey of literature review. So if you look at those papers, you see that in each of those papers, I create a session which I call summary of major findings, what I find in each of these papers and all that. Okay. Okay, so number 4, I think God will help us today with time because the time is flying so fast. So maybe I have to go faster now. So number 4, where you can get idea for publication is a theory. You know, you can look at existing theory and look at, oh, this theory, for example, you have the growth theory, you have the energy-led growth hypothesis, tourism-led growth hypothesis, globalization-led growth hypothesis. you can actually look at this hypothesis, look at the strength of this hypothesis, look at the weakness of this hypothesis. Do you have a new theory to present? So by looking at the existing theory, you can actually get an idea for publication. And this idea was actually, look, in 1956, Robert Solus talked about the neoclassical growth model. He developed the neoclassical growth model, and he published the paper in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Okay, 30 years later, somebody else felt that, oh, this theory needs to be modified. And Paul Roma in 1986, which is in this paper he published in the Journal of Political Economy, felt that, oh, there is need to talk about human capital, there is need to talk about knowledge spillover and all that. So he wrote another paper in addition to actually bring out the weakness in the classical model, and this paper was published in the Journal of Political Economy. So also Hepman and Greenman, 1991, also modified this theory also in 1991, and they also published the paper in journal. So you can look at the existing literature, the existing theory, and you can actually get an idea for publication. So where do I get idea for publication? Number 5, methodology. Okay, so methodology here, there are several methodologies. My discipline is economics, and every time I try to track the development in econometrics and say, okay, what are the new methods in econometrics that are coming up? You know, all those old methods, when you use them to publish papers, when you use them to write papers, people have seen those things many times, and they may not be interested in those papers. You can actually address an old issue, an old subject, by using a new method. And when you address old issue with new method, surely you can get it published, even in Q1 journal. So you try to review the existing methodology, you try to look at what are the strengths of this methodology, because if you look at the development of econometrics, I'm not going to talk about that here in detail, but if you look at how econometrics have been evolving, starting from OLS in time series, moving to ARODL, moving to other forms that address cross-sectional dependence, you know, that is for time series. For panel, move from POLS to fixed effect, random effect. Now later we'll talk about a micro panel like GMM. Later other techniques came up like augmented mean group, common correlated effect by Pesera 2006. Talk about augmented dynamic common correlated effect by Chudi and Pesera 2015. There are so many methods there, Dimitrus and Hulin 2012. So all these methods, the newer the method, the better to get it published in ISI journal. So you can look at existing methods. Basically, in most of my papers, I don't use one method in any of my paper, because when I use one method in any of my paper, for sure, I know the paper will be rejected. So I don't try to waste my time, because there is no one cap that fits it all. So for example, I use GMM, and I said, oh, I want to control for endogeneity, I use GMM. What of cross-sectional dependence? Then I need to use something, maybe augmented mean group, or common correlated effect, or dynamic common correlated effect. So even when I do that, what of heterogeneity? To account for heterogeneity, maybe I have to do a pool mean group or mean group and all that. So in that case, what I majorly do in most of my papers is I use a hybrid. I use a hybrid of approach. Like the paper I published in Environmental Science and Pollution Research, I use 6 different methods to address the issue. And the paper I published in Journal of Sustainable Tourism, I use also 6 different methods. I remember one of the reviewers asking me, oh, you have used so many methods to address this issue. Are you sure your data fit into this method? So I have to use a footnote of about half a page to explain why my data fit into the method. All those things you can do. The reviewers are usually impressed when they see that you address issues. I remember one of the third reviewer said, oh, of all these results, the result I prefer is the pool mean group, because the pool mean group result actually account for heterogeneity across the country. I don't care about all of that result, but with this pool mean group result, I am fine. And he recommended the paper for publication. So one reviewer may like a particular method because he is used to that method. Another reviewer may like another method because he's used to that method. So when you have a hybrid, when you have different methodology, you can easily get your paper published. And you look at the method people have used before, and you can look at the weakness in those papers and come up with a better method. Okay, so now, okay, this was just the paper I talked about. The paper I said I used 6 different methods published in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. It's a Q1 journal. And also this one also was published in a Journal of Policy Modeling, also SSCI, this is a Q2 journal and all that. So number 6, where to get ideas for publication, we talk about approach. The method you use is different from the approach. Okay, you can use a different approach that account for different economic and econometric issues such as dynamism, endogeneity, heterogeneity, cross-sectional dependence, and all that. So you can criticize the existing approach and say, oh, this person got this idea because the approach he used did not account for these issues. So I want to use an approach that can account for these issues. So you can use a different approach, and you must state the reason why you use the different approaches. Okay. Men looking at a paper that always look at dynamism, so because you want to check out how the adjustment happen between countries, you just use a dynamic model, and you didn't care about the heterogeneity and cross-sectional dependence. Then you can write your paper using the same data and the same issue, and tell them, oh, this paper didn't address for heterogeneity and cross-sectional dependence. I think that if these 2 issues are addressed, the result may be different. Then you write your paper. If you actually find just a little different, what you need is just a little contribution to the literature, and the paper will be published. But if you repeat the work and the results are the same, then you have nothing to sell. Yeah. So that I've also I just did this paper about, that was in May or so. Yeah. So this paper I try to use a different approach to look at how electricity consumption and production affect carbon emission. So I use a disaggregated approach, which is not common in many papers, and I was able to get the paper into a Q1 journal. So this one also, I also did some time ago. I think that was 2016. You know, I tried to look at the tripartite analysis. So my interest here was trying to look at, is there a trilateral or a tripartite relationship between trade, financial development, and economic growth? And I picked the 3 largest economies in Africa, and I tried to look at it. A lot of people have done something on financial development and growth. A lot of people have done something on trade and growth, comparing using other control variables. So in that case, we look at it here, and we said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to look at the relationship between these variables, and the paper was published in Contemporary Economics. Okay, number 7. Where can I get ideas for publication? Number 7, you can look at the data. Okay, so you can look at the data people have used. You can use a different set of data. You can extend the data coverage. You can increase your sample size. Look at the individuals they cover. Look at the firms they cover, the country they cover. So once you increase the size, you can actually get the data and analyze the data and see why. So you can actually say, oh, this person used data before the global financial crisis, or this person used the data before the Asia financial crisis, and that was why the results are different. So you can actually look at the data people have published and actually look at how you can come up with your paper. All this I have also done earlier on. I did this paper last year, and it was published in Environmental Science and Pollution Research, a Q1 journal. And what I was just interested in here was that energy can affect growth. Everybody is talking about that. You can see over 100 papers on energy affecting carbon emission. But my interest was that if I use different data, now talking about a heterogeneous income group. So World Bank already have a data on the dividing country into 4 groups, talking about a high income group, talking about a upper middle income group, lower middle income group, and the lower income group, those 4 groups. Assuming I use those 4 different data, with my result be different, then I did the paper. Then surely I find differential result. That for high income country, the result is different. For middle income country, the result is different. For low income country, and the result is different. And the idea got published in a Q1 journal. So actually, you can look at the data and see what people are actually doing. So number 8, where can I get idea for publication? So number 8, you talk about current issues. So you talk about current issues. Yeah, I just checked my time. So I plan to use 1 hour so that we can use the other half an hour to take the Q&A. So So I will conclude the next 15 minutes. So let's just look at this. We can look at current issues. Now there are a lot of current issues talking about climatic problems, global warming, environmental degradation. Like Dr. Tamara Henderson was saying yesterday, that people tend to be carried away these days because of the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, people don't talk about other things that affect other global economic problems that are going on. You know, I actually like that slide she presented yesterday during her keynote speech. And the truth of the matter is that because COVID-19 is here, everybody is wearing masks, everybody is using sanitizer. We tend to forget about other global issues that are actually eating us deep into our bone marrow. And we can actually look at those issues. Yes, a lot of papers have been published in about COVID-19 in the last 6 months. And I can also tell you, so many papers that were hurriedly published about COVID-19 have also been retracted in the last 2 or 3 months. I'm sure Dr. Said, he's very current with news, and Dr. Nava, so they will agree with me on this. So just check the internet and see how many COVID-19 papers, they got so many, because they rush the paper, they publish the paper in a different way, and they talk about all kind of nonsense they rush to publish, and most of them were published in nature science journals, you know, reputable journals, and they have retracted the papers. So what it is that even when an issue is a current issue, it's good to do an in-depth analysis. Okay, try to do an in-depth analysis. This is a current event that is happening now. I need to get my data right. I need to get my strategy right. But there was one of the papers that was retracted. It was said that the paper was submitted on the 19th of one month, and on the 21st of the other, or the 21st of 2 days later, the paper was already accepted. And people were questioning whether the paper was even reviewed, whether the editor even take note of what they were doing and all that. So my advice here is, when you are looking at current issues, try to get good knowledge of the issue, try to understand the issue before you put your pen to paper, because otherwise you may just end up writing a paper, and at the end of the day they find out that, oh, there are some defects in the paper, and they may have to retract the paper. So you can also look at government policies, look at what you are doing. Maybe you are doing something on consumer behavior, you are doing something on consumer satisfaction, you are doing something related to firms, maybe microfinance or all that. You can look at what is the government policy on this. Is the government policy on this issue actually right or wrong? If you feel, yes, you are an academic, you are free to write. So you can write regarding a particular policy government is taking. I think some time ago, I did a lot of this because when I was working in the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Study, which is with the national parliament in my country. So my idea was actually to look at government policy and evaluate government policy. And since I work for the national parliament, so I was like a watchdog to what the presidency was doing. That means to what the executive arm of the government was doing, because the parliament is the legislative arm. So whenever the government is talking about budget, government is talking about taxation, government is talking about fiscal policy, so I have to look at what government is doing, evaluate what government is doing, and look at address those issues. For the period I was there before I traveled to Malaysia, you know, I wrote about 13 papers regarding government policies. I think some of them I share here. Yeah, so this is one of them. On this paper, I try to look at whether government budget is actually good, or whether government budget implementation. Because I look at what the executive arm of government is doing. Do they actually implement the budget they prepare? At the beginning of the year, they prepare budget. So I collected data on government budget, and I do an analysis to look at whether government budget implementation was good or not. So there was another one on capital budget implementation. I also did. So the issue of economic union. So this policy came up because I was trying to look at the West Africa region was trying to form an economic union. They want to use the same currency as is done in the Europe. So they want to have the same fiscal policy. They want to have the same trade policy. They want to have the same custom policy. And I try to look at, it's better to look at this country and look at what ECOWAS is doing, because they have another economic integration called ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. That's okay. Let's evaluate what these issues are before we talk about coming up with a common currency. And also another one was also on legislative oversight. I tried to look at whether government budget is being influenced by the legislative arm of government. Of course, I was working for the legislative arm of government, so I want to know whether their oversight function, their committee function actually affect budget performance. So many more like that I try to look at. So Where do I get ideas for publication? Number 9, issues on media. Okay, so apart from government policies, which may not receive so much media attention, you can also look at issues on media. What are the media saying today? Mass media is there, the print media is there, and the social media is very there. The social media is very strong. Talking about Facebook, talking about Instagram, LinkedIn, and all of that. So you look at the issues. What are people talking about? What are the burning issues? You know, you can actually look at those issues and pick up your pen and put your pen to paper and come up with a paper. Some time ago in my country, they were talking about whether foreign capital inflow is actually good for Nigeria, and whether Nigeria should stop foreign capital inflow, because the argument was that foreign capital inflow, such as foreign direct investment, foreign aid, external debt, and portfolio investment. So there were a lot of arguments in the media, especially on television and radio, that the country was accepting so many foreign capital, and because of that, the country was not making any effort to develop domestic capital. Because if you look at Keynesian theory, you look at the classical theory, you look at the endogenous and exogenous theory, they all talk about physical capital important for economic performance and economic prosperity. And this capital, you can source them from two ways. Either you can source them domestically, or you can source them from internationally. So when you source this capital out internationally, it may bring about volatility in your country. The reason is because if you depend so much on foreign aid, you depend so much on external debt, of course you are going to be servicing the debts, right? Yeah, so when you borrow money, you're going to be servicing the debt. So the money you have, the resources you have used to develop infrastructure in your country, so you are using to service debt because you open your door to external debt. I'm also talking about foreign direct investment, because in economics there is what we call economies of scale and economies of scope. Because these multinational companies, they have the best of technology, they enjoy all types of economies of scale, talking about financial economies of scale, technical economies of scale, managerial economies of scale. So they can produce this output at a lower price, at a lower cost. So if you allow your country to be dominated by multinational companies, so the domestic companies, of course, they will suffer because they will not be able to produce at the same efficiency level as those multinational companies. So many people were talking about evaluating whether these foreign capitals, talking about these 4 types of foreign capital: foreign direct investment, foreign aid, external debt, and portfolio investment, whether they were actually good for the country. So based on that, I did this paper, and I published it in a Journal of Africa Business, which is a Q1 journal. So there's also this one I did because the country was talking about the local, the state government not depending on the federal government, because they talk about internally generated revenue, and they said, oh, if there is, because the federal government of my country is majorly dependent on oil, crude oil is a major source of revenue. So whenever there is volatility in the international crude oil market, then to affect my country. So the media was talking about, why can't the state government think of generating revenue internally? So based on that, I did this paper, and it was published. That was around 2014 or so. Also, I also talk about the role of parliament in ECOWAS region, and it was because of, in response to what people were talking in the press. So finally, number 10, where do I get idea for publication? You can get idea for publication by looking at published journal article or conference papers. So when I pick up a journal published article, so I should look at the objective, what the journal article is talking about. I should look at the methodology. I should look at the literature review. Then I should look at the limitation of the study and the suggestion for further study. To some reviewers, it's very important that in the last paragraph of your paper, which is the conclusion part, you should suggest, you should make suggestions for further research. You know, I was talking to somebody about 3 or 4 years ago, and he told me, oh, he read a particular paper, and when he looked at the suggestion for further research, he saw the suggestion there, so he quickly wanted to write paper on the suggestion, but he was slow. You know, while he was still contemplating, should I write or I shouldn't write? You know, about 2 or 3 months later, he saw the same suggestion. Somebody else has already written it, and he felt bad for himself. He said, oh, I have this idea from on a platter of gold. Somebody already suggested this idea. So how come I didn't take advantage of it, and somebody else took an advantage of it and already published it? I also remember that some time ago when this BROI started or became very popular, talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, you know, one professor called me and they said, okay, Kizzy, let's do paper on BROI. Let's try to do paper because now everybody is talking about BROI, Belt and Road Initiative, where China want to carry out this integration with the Asian country and also some African countries, some European countries, and the BI caught about over 60 countries. And someone said, okay, let's put these 60 countries together and see what we can do. I said, okay, Prof, you know, do you know 1 year after we couldn't do that paper because we had other things we were doing, and it took us a lot of we couldn't have the time to actually do the paper. While we were doing other things, you know, one day I was going through Science Direct and I saw a paper. Somebody already did a BROI, did a paper on BROI, and I discovered that, oh, the person was trying to look at trade and finance, you know, how trade will affect finance in BROI country. You know, and I showed the paper to Prof, and I said, Prof, you see, so this was a suggestion we wanted to do about 1 year ago, and now somebody has done it. Okay, no problem. We are going to see other areas of BROI we can do. You know, but we couldn't really do that. There was no time for us to do it. But last year, I just talked about, oh, I have this idea. Do I just allow this idea to go like this? I said no. So I just tried to pick my pen and I picked my paper and I tried to look at 10 different variables on BROI, how those different variables can actually, what those variables will perform, talking about those BROI countries. And that paper was published 30th of June, which was just about 2 weeks ago in Singapore Economic Review. At the end of the day, I was the only person who did the paper alone because the prof was too busy and we couldn't actually look at the paper. So that is just one way you can actually get an idea, and you can actually lose the idea if you don't quickly take advantage of it. Okay, so now, yeah, this is also an example of an idea I got from a suggestion for further study talking about exchange rate. You know, I read the paper written by Agrion and Tor, 2009, and I discovered that he did something on exchange rate and finance growth nexus. So what he did was that he was trying to look at whether finance growth nexus will affect the impact of exchange rate on economic growth. And I said, oh, so why can't I turn it around? Okay, then I said, okay, I can turn it around. Rather than looking at the impact of finance, whether finance promote exchange rate on growth, why can't I look at whether the exchange rate promote finance on growth and look at the volatility? And I did this paper and I published it in Economist. And this paper is a Q2 journal. Okay, so that is about all on how to publish, where to publish or where to get ideas for publication. So I've talked about 10 different ways you can get ideas. I talked about thesis, talked about variables, talked about a literature review. I talked about theory. So I talked about using different methodology. I talked about approaches, talked about data, talked about current event, talk about mass media event, and also talk about published journal. So one thing you should know is that we should know how to organize our ideas. You know, when you have the ideas, how do you organize your ideas? I will stop in the next 8 minutes. I plan to stop 10:10 so that we can use 20 minutes for Q&A. Yeah. So now, how do you extend your ideas? And some people come and said, "Oh, I've been working on a particular area. It appears I've written everything in that area, so there is nothing to write." So that's why it's okay. I'll just share this with you. Maybe this will help. You know, in my early days of writing papers, I was majorly focusing on government policies, because of course I work in national parliament in my country, and I was like the watchdog of the national parliament, watching what the executive was doing. So all the papers and my unit in my national parliament was macroeconomics and public finance unit. So I was much involved in macroeconomics, public finance issues. So all the papers I was writing those period was, of course, I should write paper related to what I'm doing in my office. So I was writing papers related to macroeconomics and public finance. But when I came to Malaysia in 2015, and I was to do my PhD in USM, and I said, okay, I don't want to do my PhD in public finance. Okay, I said, okay, I want to do my PhD in finance, financial economics. Okay, and I said, okay, but I already have a good knowledge of macroeconomics and public finance. So how do I blend these ideas together? And after some days of thinking, and I said, okay, let me do something related to macroeconomic stability and finance, okay, and finance growth measures. So I try to bring what I already know to a new area which I have not, which I have not actually go into before. And I did my PhD on that, and I published a lot of papers, about 14 papers from the thesis. And when I finished, after my convocation, I was a kind of I was a kind of exhausted. Or there was no idea for me to publish. You talk about finance growth measures and macroeconomic stability. You have published 14 papers in those areas. So there was nothing for me to talk about except I want to republish the papers I have published. Then I thought to myself, okay, what should I do now? Perhaps let me extend the horizon, the scope of my research. I said, okay, people are doing things on energy economics, but I don't know anything on energy economics. Okay, let me try to read about energy economy. So I started reading about energy economics, and after some months of reading about energy economy, I felt, okay, since I already know finance, why not blend finance on energy economics? Try to look at how finance affects energy economics, then take it to carbon dioxide emission. And I said, okay, for this in the next 2 years, for this area in the next 2 years, I'm going to write 10 papers and see how I can actually combine what I already know with this new area I want to go into. And I started. And within 2 years, I was able to write 10 papers, and 6 of those papers have been published. Of course, you see some of them in applied energy sources, environmental science, pollution research, energy report, and all that. So after publishing those 10 papers in energy economy, after writing those 10 papers in energy economics, 4 of them are still undergoing review. And I look at it, I said, oh, I don't want to do anything on energy economics. I think I also shared with Dr. Said some time ago. I don't want to do anything on energy economics any longer. I want to go to a new area. And I just felt that, oh, can't I actually extend this energy economics to tourism? This is also an aspect of economics, so that I see I'm moving from macroeconomics to finance growth measures, from finance growth measures, I move to energy, from energy, I'm moving to tourism, so that there will be a synchrony of what I am doing. I move from what I know to what I don't know, and blend my research area in a way. And I said, okay, fine. Okay, let me see what I can do in tourism economics. And I started reading about tourism economics. And as of today, I have written 3 papers on tourism economics. Of course, one of them you saw earlier on, published in Journal of Sustainable Tourism. The other 2 papers are coming up shortly in 2 different ISI journals. So after writing those 3 papers, I felt, oh, I need to extend this horizon again. And now for this year, 2020, I am doing something on globalization. And one of the papers I presented in the BLME conference yesterday. So globalization, I'm currently doing 3 papers now on globalization. They are with me. I have not sent them out for review. So for your ideas, for you not to run out of ideas when it comes to publication, one thing you can do is that you can actually extend the scope of your research. Okay, by extending the scope of your research, so you will never be short of ideas to write when it comes to publication. And finally, I'm not going to talk much about this because this is just talking about how to organize ideas. Of course, we know the literature review session. I did a workshop on that some time ago. Literature review, I also did a workshop on that. So these are just ways you can actually organize your ideas. Look at the introduction session, look at the literature review, the theoretical conceptual framework, the methodology, the data, the empirical result, and the implication. I remember telling my student, the participant in one of my workshops on how to write introduction session, that so to me, the most important aspect of writing a paper is the introduction session, because that is where the reviewer has the patience. You know, for the last 6 months, I've reviewed 17 papers for 17 different ISI journals, majorly Q1 journals, renewable energy and sustainable and all that. The area I will have to read first is the introduction. If the introduction is fine, I am fine. Because if the introduction is fine, it means that you know what you want to do. So if your literature review is not updated or is very scanty, then I will just make a comment, oh, update your literature review. If your methodology is wrong, you use the wrong methodology, of course you have a problem. I tell you, oh, what you set out to do in the introduction session, you didn't get the right method to do it. The result is not valid. And for the past years, I share this with you, that I've been reviewing papers for different SSCI journal and all that. I have never rejected a paper and the editor accepted the paper. Okay, although there was one occasion I recommended one paper for major revision and the editor rejected the paper. So when the editor copy me on the letter to the on the decision, there were three reviewers. The other two reviewers rejected the paper, and the editor said, "Oh, they have to go by majority, and they have to reject the paper, even though I recommended major revision." So what I mean is that I'm not to the extreme of rejecting papers. No, rather I took up, oh, how can this, because like my deputy dean in my former university told me that, oh, Kizzy, you know that in any piece of paper, a lot of work has gone into it. No matter how bad the paper is, I think it is better to look at how we can improve the paper rather than just say reject. You can see some reviewers report, they don't even read the paper in detail before you write 1 or 2 lines and they say reject. I don't do that. I look at read the paper from the beginning, especially the introduction section is very important. So when you are writing the introduction, you have to justify what is the motivation for the study, why do you want to do the study, what are the contributions to the study, what are the gaps in the external literature that you want to fill with this paper. I think those ones are very important. And also you have to use the right theory, you have to use the right methodology and the right data. You know, the worst thing one can do to himself or herself is to write a paper and get your data from the wrong source. So you have to be careful about your data and write your empirical result following the standard procedure, and let the implication, the conclusion, and the recommendation be very clear. So finally, I think this is my last slide, talking about conclusion. If you want to get ideas for publications, you want to publish papers, time management is very important. Try to avoid social media distraction, even though you can get publication idea from there. Don't spend so much time there. I remember some time ago, about 2 years ago, I think I'm getting better now, because when Dr. Sai sent me message now, maybe it take me only 1 hour to respond. There was time before when people send me message on WhatsApp, it take me a whole day to respond. Yeah, because I just feel that, oh, why should I? But now, especially in tailors, a lot of information coming from Miss Mala, my boss, different people. So I have to keep my phone to myself. You know, I only look at, and when I open my WhatsApp, I only look at those who are my bosses and see those urgent messages. So you should try to avoid social media distraction, spend more time on your research, read extensively, collect adequate data, attend workshop and professional training, and share your work with experienced people. Be patient and be prayerful. You know, every time I wake up in the day, when I wake up in the day, sometimes before I say my prayers in the morning, I have to open my email to see has my paper be accepted or rejected. You know, sometimes you wait for 6 months, no news. You have maybe 10, 15 papers in 10, 15 different journals. No news. Sometimes you feel agitated, but you have to be patient. Patience is needed for you to publish. I think with that now, I will have to end my presentation here because it's 10:10. So any question? Over to you, Dr. Said.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kizito. Thank you for sharing the valuable information, and you use very good examples of your publications. I learned a lot from your session. I have some questions, but first I open the floor for Q&A session to the participants. So if there is any question, feel free to ask.
Dr. Kizito.
Yes, boss.
Oh, okay. You have done a wonderful job and outstanding work, you know, in research, because both of us from USM.
Yes,
so
yes.
USM insist on publications, you know. Without that, we cannot survive in USM.
Yeah.
So we are there for long years in USM. So I just want to ask, you know, for our PhD students, what would you suggest, apart from the regular points you have mentioned wonderfully, 3 striking points for them to have publication in ISI Impact Factor Journal? That is not regular journal, more SSCI or ISI Impact Factor Journal. If they want to publish, what are the 3 striking points would you like to tell them?
Prof. Jarama, you remember you were my teacher in USM. I remember I attended several of your workshops organized by IPS, and yeah, you taught me a lot about publication. Most of the things I know today, part of them are from you and also from other professors too. I'm not sure I will be able to answer your question because you are my teacher, but I will just try. Okay. Yeah, I remember in one of our workshops in USM, you taught us about how to spot gaps, in gaps to publish, talking about looking at the various gaps, how they can look at what have been published before, looking at the research gap in different studies. But as a PhD student, there are a lot of things you can do if you want to publish papers. And the first one you can do, which I talked about earlier on, is you must read. During my PhD, in fact, I have some Iranian guys, who were very hardworking in my study room, and that's why you see today I'm very close to Dr. Navas and Dr. Saeed, because I'm very close to Iranians. Iranians are very hardworking, So apology to other people from other countries. Yeah, so these Iranian guys were very hardworking in my study room. Sometimes we are there until 12 in the night, and when it's 12 a.m., we greet ourselves, good morning, then we continue working until 2 a.m. One thing we do is that we read. As PhD students, you have to read. If you don't read, how do you know what is going on in the literature? How do you know what is the new methodology? Okay, so as a PhD student, you must read. Rather than spending so much time on WhatsApp or Facebook, you must spend time looking at current issues. What are the current issues in your area of study? So when you read more, you get to understand what people are doing. You cannot give what you don't have. It is when you read and you get this information, and that is when you'll be able to put your pen to paper and write. The second one is talking about interaction with people. I remember when I was in USM, I was always attending workshop. I attended Prof. Jarama workshop many times. I remember there was a time we were doing we call it SSPIS postgraduate seminar in my school. We invited Prof. Jarama, although he was not able to attend because he had other issues. So in USM, he's very highly regarded. When we talk about publication, he teaches people how to publish papers. So when you don't attend such workshop as a PhD student, how do you know what to publish? You stay in the corner of your house and you want to know how to publish? It is not possible. So apart from reading, you must interact with people if you want to publish. And I think the third one is patience. Like I said earlier on, sometimes I wake up 5 a.m. in the morning, open my phone, check my email, whether reviewer have blasted me. This year I've published 7 papers that have been rejected like 10 times. But people don't hear this other side of the story. They say, oh, okay, so you published 7 papers in 2020, all in Q1 journal, 3 of them are single author. Oh, but nobody will know that 10 of my papers have been rejected this year alone. But people don't hear the other side of the story. But I need to be patient. Sometimes your paper is rejected, you feel bad for 1 minute, then you dust yourself together. So whenever your paper is rejected, have the patience and have the resilience to dust yourself up again, like my PhD professor, Prof. Lien, will say, whenever your paper is rejected, just cry for 1 day, then the next day, console yourself and carry on, okay? So you just carry on, look at the paper again, look at the reviewer's comment, and see how you can actually do it. I share this with you. Since I joined Taylor's in January 2019 up to now, I have published 15 papers. 14 of them are ISI paper, majorly Q1 papers. And all of them are first author or single author, okay? Do you know that there is none of those papers that was not rejected by at least one journal? There is no any of those 15 papers I have written and sent to the journal. They say, oh, this is Kizi's paper, accept. No way. Some were rejected 2 times, some were rejected 3 times, some were rejected 4 times. But each time I get rejected, I just feel bad. And when my wife gets close to me, I say, come on, can you give me some breathing space? When my 3 daughters come to me, I say, come on, can you give me some space? I just think about myself, feel bad. Then the next day I pick myself up and say, okay, I look at and sometimes the rejection could be very painful because 2 reviewers will review the paper. One will say revision and the other one will say reject. And the editor will write you, oh, there was a split of decision. I have to read the paper again. I'm sorry, I have to reject the paper. So you see, you are very close to getting the paper in, but you are out again. Then you start all over again. Just last week, my paper was rejected by Singapore Economic Review. Even though I published 2 papers there in the last 6 months. And I submitted the paper in November last year, which is almost 8 months. And the paper came rejected, and I said, oh my God. So I have to start all over again. So patience, reading, and interaction with learned colleagues are very important for PhD students.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Prof. Jaya, I think you are the most active participant of all sessions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we should have an award for you.
Oh, no, no need.
To appreciate your contribution to the sessions. In all sessions, you have been the almost among the first participants who joined the sessions, and you always have questions related to the sessions, and you have contributed a lot to all sessions that we have conducted in these 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, any question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Can I ask Dr.
Can I thank Kizi? Hello, Dr. Kizi.
Yeah, Dr. Navas.
Say you that thank you so much because of two main reasons. Firstly, because you mentioned my name many times during your lecture, and I'm very happy because I do nothing, but at the end you make me famous. Thank you so much for that. You do all the hard work, you prepare the webinar, and then you spend a lot of time. I just sit here, I enjoy your webinar. At the end, I get famous. Thank you for that.
Oh,
and
thank you, Dr. Navas.
I know that you mentioned in your last slide, the last word there was prayer. And I know that how important prayer is for you. And today is your Sunday, your prayer time, and still you allocated your prayer time to us. So that is really valuable, and I wanted to appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Navas. Thank you for your kind words.
Okay, thank you, Nawaz. Any question? Actually, Dr. Kizito, yesterday Nawaz told me why you call people with their first name. Dr. Kizito, thank you. Yeah, you almost answered my question. You shared a lot in your session about how to publish, how to get ideas to publish. I wanted to ask you how to reduce the chance to get rejected. This is a fact that we get more rejection than acceptance. I think I got more than 400 rejections since I started publication. I was counting a few days ago. I cannot because I don't know many of them, but at least 400 rejections I got. But these days very competitive. So I feel that journals, they just do their best to reject your paper because they receive so many papers, they don't have enough resources, enough reviewers. So they, I would say in many cases, they just try their best to reject immediately. And yeah, so maybe we can have, you almost answered this question, but I think we need to have a session only on how to not get rejected. Definitely we will get rejected, but at least to reduce the chance to get rejected. I have some papers that one of them, more than 15 times I got rejected. At the end, it was published in a good journal, but 15 times rejected. It took more than 2 years to get acceptance. So anyway, this is part of the game.
Yeah, Dr. Said, you are right, because I've had, you know, when it comes to publication, I'm just like, I'm not even worthy to carry your shoes because I am in my early career. So I just started publishing, you know, like you or Prof. Jarama or other people here. Yeah, but the good thing is that I like to share with people. And this seminar actually was actually to enlighten people to share how I get my ideas for publication. It's not actually about how to publish a paper.
Yeah.
Just like you said, a webinar on how to publish a paper, then I will go into how to write the different aspects of the paper and what to include in your papers that your paper will not be rejected. I think I'll be doing such a webinar like that for CADR sometime in the future. Meanwhile, on Friday, next Friday, which is July 17th, I think I also have a seminar with CDHRO, and that one is it's also something related to publication, but not exactly what you want. You know, sometimes I don't have. Sometimes I have like this type of webinar. I have the opportunity to share. Sometimes CDRO will tell me, "Oh, Dr. Kizi, this is what we want you to speak on," because many times I wanted to talk about econometrics, how people can use different advanced econometric techniques to get their paper in, but it appears CDHRO, they said, oh, most of our students are business students or from education or from hospitality. They don't do much econometry, so they decide on what they want me to do. Yeah, so basically like what you talked about, if there's any need to do that in the future, of course, you know how to get me. I'm always at your service, boss.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question here. Yeah, Jesslyn sent me a message. I would like to ask how long Dr. Kizi took to revise his paper before resubmit.
Okay. How long it take me to revise my paper before resubmit? Well, it depends. The truth of there are different categories. For example, if I submit a paper to any journal, the first thing that comes to my mind is to avoid desk rejection. And that is, I think that is what Prof. Said is talking about, how to avoid rejection. The rejection you can avoid is desk rejection. So there are things you have to write in your papers, which the first person that will read your paper, maybe the associate editor or the editor will go through and feel that, okay, I think this paper should be passed on to the next stage. If those things, those ingredients are not there, of course, there will be desk rejection, you know. So once you pass that stage, then you move on to the other stage. So if my paper is rejected, I look at the comment of the reviewers, okay? Sometimes it takes me 2 weeks to revise a paper. For example, I submitted a paper to Environmental Science and Pollution Research, and that was the BROI paper I was talking about, Belt and Road Initiative paper. And when I submitted the paper to them, I thought the paper was fine, you know, and 2 reviewers read the paper, and one say major revision, and the other one say reject. And the editor of the journal said, oh, he has to reject the paper. So when I look at the comment of the reviewer, they were not that much, but some of the reviewers just suggested that I should include their papers, I should include their paper, I should include their paper. They were more literature review. I said, oh my God, okay, if that is the case, we want you to include your paper, I will include your paper. So I tried to work on the literature review, and I wrote to the editor and said, I want to resubmit the paper. So yeah, submit it as a new submission. So I did that within 2 weeks, and I submitted the paper as a new submission. But unfortunately for me, the editor didn't handle the paper by himself, because he knows the history of the paper, that, oh, this paper, this was the reason why the paper was rejected. He sent the paper to another associate editor, okay? And when the associate editor read the paper, he rejected the paper straight. And he wrote me and said, oh, we don't think, we will not publish the paper because there is no enough. I said, but this paper has been reviewed by 2 people and I've addressed all the comments. So immediately, the next day, I just sent it to Singapore Economic Review, and the paper was published 30th of June. So it depends. Sometimes when the paper is rejected, you look at the issues. If you think the issues are fine, and there are things you can include in the paper, you do. That will take you like 1 or 2 weeks. There are some that you cannot include, that there are things that you may not be able to do because of limitation. Then you just send the paper immediately the next day. But you know, you have to reformat the paper, different referencing style, for different journal. So that is what normally takes time. Otherwise, you look at the review, like the paper I showed you earlier on energy sources. I have the same problem too. I sent it to empirical economists, and one reviewer say accept, the other reviewer say, so one reviewer say revision, the other reviewer say rejection. And the editor was Professor Westerlund. Everybody knows Professor Westerlund from Sweden, you know. And the prof said, reject, Kizito, I'm sorry, I have to reject your paper. When I look at it, I just look at it. Within 3 days, I addressed the comment by the 2 editors, and I sent it to energy sources, and it was accepted and published. So it depends. Some you can take 2 weeks, some you can take a longer period. And it also depends on whether you are busy. For example, if I'm marking scripts, I'm marking student scripts, so I just keep my research by the side. Maybe 1 month, I don't even go talk about my research because I have to do my teaching very, very appropriately also. So I face my teaching. So for that 1 month, my research is suspended. So when I finish marking my scripts and everything about teaching is sorted out, then I go back again. In that case, it may take a longer time. So there is no one size fits it all. So it depends on the comment you receive and how busy you are, and whether what you feel about the comments of the reviewers.
Yes, Prof. Abdul Karim.
Good morning to all of you.
Yeah.
At the onset, I think I must wholeheartedly appreciate Dr. Kizito for his excellent ideas that is given to all of us, especially for youngsters. Being editor in a few journals and reviewer in a few more journals, I have some comments to make on this. I like your conclusion parts. Really, it was wonderful, especially the last two sentences, patience and prayers. Yes, that pay you a lot, especially patience. In regard to this, I refer to Prof. Said Sharif, who has told that just now that he got a rejection of about 15 papers recently and more than hundreds papers in the past. Yes, as a reviewer and editor in some journals, I want to address to this issue. Our job is, or we are included in the journal editor group or reviewer group, not just to reject outrightly, but to critically analyze all the papers and say what is good, whether it is good for the journal or to the public or not. So that's the main aim that we have while reviewing and editing. When the editor and reviewer makes comments, I agree with you, Dr. Kizito, that the patience is required from the writer, from the author. So he must go through patiently whatever being recommended by the editor and the reviewer. And then, because we write some secret comments to the editor also, which will not be revealed to the author. So the editor, keeping these comments in his mind, he may reflect his opinion on your paper. So you must receive it patiently and work out to rectify, to address those issues which are highlighted. So that was done by Prof. Said Sharif very honestly and very sincerely, and that's why his papers are again accepted in the journals. So this is a very nice paper by you, and we are all benefited. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for your kind words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? We still have time if you have any question.
May I talk a little bit more?
Yes, please.
Yes. Many of the researchers, especially the seniors, they use a constant reply that you are reinventing the wheel, and then they attempt to reject your ideas. I don't accept this view by the seniors. Why do you phrase it as a reinventing the wheel in research? Because every new idea should be accepted. Reinventing the wheel, after all, if we go back to the history, centuries ago, man was pulling the load without any wheel. So he was just struggling to pull it up. Then he thought, why not I make something round and which can help us? So he made a wooden wheel. But first they started a stone wheel, then they converted into wooden wheel. The wooden wheel still now being practiced in villages to pull the bullock cart. So you see, even after centuries together, it is applied still. Then it is changed to cycle wheel, then automobile wheel, you know everything, including the wheels to produce energy and power. So reinventing wheel is not a correct phrase to reject ideas. Actually, reinvention should be welcomed. And the youngsters should not get disheartened by these words. And you try to apply, as Dr. Kizito has correctly put, you go through the available literature and slightly change and you put the novel ideas, new ideas, then you develop the paper to be fit for publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. And add something. I was reading a paper in Nature, published in Nature. There's, as you mentioned, actually even it's good to reinvent the wheel. I think you mean replication, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, you have heard about replication crisis. I read a paper in Nature, and they some researchers, they selected papers randomly from top tier journals in, if I'm not mistaken, in science, even in science, not social sciences, in science. They couldn't replicate 70% of papers. Even 50% of researchers could not replicate their own studies. They couldn't get the same results. And a review paper in cancer studies showed that only 11% of cancer studies could be replicated. So yeah, why not? We can do this. We can replicate the studies. We can reinvent the wheel, and this may contribute. This should contribute to the body of knowledge.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, Dr. Kizito, can we contact you later if we had more questions?
Sure.
But we should have more webinars like this. Actually, you gave me a few ideas. So I have a list of future
oh my God.
webinars. So I will invite you. Oh, Prof. Ratnes has a quiz. Oh no, she's.
No, I want to ask whether the video will be given to us, because I have never seen somebody as impressive as Dr. Kizito present in such an impressive manner. And I must say, oh my goodness gracious me, we have a jewel among us.
Prof, thank you so much for your kind words. I appreciate, Prof.
Really, I'm very appreciative of the fact that you did this, and I take home only one lesson, which is stop playing with my WhatsApp and Facebook, social media, and start looking into doing your research. Thank you so much.
Regarding your question,
thank you, Prof.
Yeah, and the link to all sessions, parallel sessions, opening, closing, webinars, all will be posted on YouTube, and the link will be sent to all participants.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you, Prof. Syed. Thank you very much. That's a good idea.
You're welcome.